The day has finally come when I've decided to put my chainsaws away, to stop using them. It's been a good long run, but it's time. I'm going to tell you why you might want to consider doing the same. You might even soon be required to stop using chainsaws. In some areas they've already been banned, other areas they're likely going to ban them soon. This may sound like just a bunch of clickbait nonsense, but what you're going to discover is this is real. These bans come from an inherent problem with the design of chainsaws. You have a metal chain that's moving fast along a metal bar. There are no rollers, no bearings in between. It's just metal scraping on metal. If you've ever ran a chainsaw when it's close to dark or dark, you may notice that metal on metal produces sparks. The engine can also produce sparks that comes out the exhaust. They put spark arrestor screens on the mufflers to reduce that, but I have seen sparks get through there. Most sparks from a chainsaw are small, they go out quickly, but I have seen a few that were larger that stayed glowing red hot for a disturbingly long period of time. My thought was, if that landed in some really dry tinder, that could start a fire. As wildfires are becoming such a huge, destructive, expensive, life-threatening problem in so many places, some of these areas are banning chainsaws. A lot of people are unaware of this. It typically doesn't get much media attention, not because of some goofy conspiracy theory, but the general population, the masses, typically don't care that much about what's happening out in the woods. That is not until the woods catch on fire and they are threatening to burn their homes or their cities. That's when they start to get a little bit interested in the subject. But until then, people's interest in hearing about wildfire prevention is about the same as their interest in listening to the safety lectures at work. So the media doesn't have a whole lot of incentive to go very deep into these subjects. But a lack of awareness does not constitute immunity from the potentially severe economic, criminal, and civil consequences that could result from the unauthorized use of such prohibited equipment. Which is just a fancy way of saying, if you run your chainsaw when you're not supposed to be running a chainsaw, you might get yourself into really big trouble. I'll give you a quick story that should explain why it might not be a good idea to run a chainsaw right now. A few years ago, and a few miles to the north, two guys sparked a wildfire. The spark came off of a piece of equipment they were using that they weren't supposed to be using. A huge amount of effort and resources were put into fighting the fire. A month later, they finally got it contained at 26,000 acres. At that point, those two guys were served the bill of over $37 million to cover the cost of fighting the fire. Lucky for those guys, there were two of them, so they got to split the bill. They were also very fortunate nobody was killed by the fire. If anybody would have been killed by the fire or while fighting the fire, they could be held liable for manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, or whatever fancy term they want to use when somebody dies because somebody else was doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. I think a lot of people don't understand just how dry it gets in many parts of the country in the summer, especially people on the East Coast where they actually get rain during the summer and they have a lot of humidity. Last fall, I took an enjoyable trip to the great state of Maine. While I was there, people were going on and on about how bad the drought was, how dry it was there, while I was looking around thinking, dude, your grass is still green. You have no idea what dry and drought is. After months of no rain, temperatures in the 90s, hundreds, very low humidity, our landscape becomes tinder dry. If you look at the ground, it's covered in the type of material you would use to start a fire with flint and steel. The way that works, you scrape one of those materials against the other, they throw out sparks, sparks land in the tinder, light it on fire. Does that remind you of anything? Even out in the woods where some of the most hardy plants are barely hanging on to staying green, the whole landscape is covered in the type of material a survivalist would use to start a fire using sparks. Actually, people in most survival situations could probably only dream they could have tinder that is as dry as what is covering our whole landscape. With all of that in mind, is there any kind of potential problem that you could imagine arising as a result of operating a spark-throwing tool in this kind of environment? Especially when the hot, dry winds can pick up at any time, often without giving any kind of warning. What could possibly go wrong here? There are ways for some people to get around these chainsaw bans. Industrial operators like loggers, they can still run chainsaws under certain rules. They have to file a notification of operation with the Department of Forestry. That opens them up to random inspection. They have to have the proper firefighting tools and equipment, and they have certain restrictions they have to follow. When fire danger gets up to a certain point, they go on what's called hoot owl. That's when they are prohibited from running chainsaws or other potentially spark-emitting equipment between the hours of 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. 1 o'clock in the afternoon is the time of day when the temperatures start to get hot, the humidity levels drop, and the afternoon winds start to kick in. Between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. are the time of day when wildfires are more likely to get out of control more quickly. The reason they call it hoot owl is the loggers get up and start working so early, the hoot owls are still out. Here in the West, we do have this obnoxious wildfire situation we have to deal with, but we also have a lot of things going for us. Right now, it's the end of July, we're in the heat of summer. It's going to be well into the 90s today. That's normal. But right now, it's in the morning. I have a long sleeve shirt on. There's a chill in the air. Our low humidity levels do help fuel the wildfires, but it also makes it a whole lot more comfortable, a whole lot more pleasant just to exist. It gets hot here, but it's not that humid, sticky hot. It also allows it to cool off at night. We don't have hurricanes. Tornadoes are extremely rare. Rare? Tornadoes are extremely rare out here. We don't have black flies, no, I have to be very careful with this one, no chiggers, that's with a CH. Don't want to set off any YouTube filters with that one. We do have wildfires, but that's about it. Okay, we do have a few earthquakes and volcanoes out here, but that's not a big deal. If you stay out of their way, they'll stay out of yours. I could get set up to operate on industrial rules and be able to run a chainsaw on hoot owl. I have the required tools and equipment, but just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should. There's a big difference between a real logging operation where you have a crew of people in production versus just 1 or 2 people out in the woods dinking around with a chainsaw. Just by the nature of the operation, the equipment moving around, logs being skid along the ground creates fuel breaks. As the soil gets disturbed and moved around, the flammable material on the ground gets mixed in with it, makes it harder to burn. The equipment they use for logging just happens to be the equipment they use for building fire line. You have a crew of people on what are basically firefighting equipment. I have my firefighting tools and equipment, but if I'm out in the woods working by myself, running a chainsaw, I start a fire, it starts to spread, there's only so much I can do. But if I'm on a logging operation, I can get on the radio, start yelling at Joe who's already running the cat, or the skidder or whatever, tell him, we got a fire down here, get that machine down here, start building fire line. Then tell Lewis, who's working on the landing, stop what you're doing, hitch up to the water wagon, get it down here now. If I'm not able to get the fire out with the fire extinguisher I'm required to carry, I can be there with the chainsaw to help fight the fire with the chainsaw for cutting fire line. While Joe shows up on the cat, Lewis shows up with the water, we can all 3 go at it very quickly. In this scenario, Sally was on the other side of the job site cutting timber with the feller buncher. Since she was way over there, it took her longer to get over here. By the time she got here, she saw the 3 of us working on the fire. She got on the thing and said, you guys are a bunch of lamos, get out of my way, I'll show you how it's done. She grabs a tree with a feller buncher, cuts it off, picks it up, carries it over to the fire, starts whacking the fire with the top of the tree with the feller buncher. Puts the fire out. Sometimes it just takes a little female ingenuity. I do have the firefighting equipment, but I don't have Joe, I don't have Lewis, and I don't have Sally. If I'm out there with a chainsaw and I start a fire, if a gust of wind comes up, there's a good chance without them that fire is going to get away, while these tools just sit here. Some people get upset about these kind of regulations. They don't like regulations, they don't like some government person telling them what they can and can't do. I get that, I really do. I'm not a big fan of one person telling another person what they can and can't do, one group telling another group what they can and can't do. We have words to describe that kind of behavior. But when I look around and see just how dry the landscape is, I'm looking at all the big fires burning out of control here in Oregon. Washington's on fire, California, other states have fires. Canada's on fire. Smoke from the Canada fires are blowing down into the US. Smoke from the fires in the western United States are blowing up into Canada, like they do just about every year, coming from our own mismanaged forests. With all that in mind, I can't help but wonder, is it really a good idea for me to be out here with a chainsaw throwing sparks around in a landscape covered in extremely dry tinder? If more people would make decisions based on looking at the situation, observing what's happening with the situation, then make the decision based on what's best under those conditions, instead of making decisions based on, I'm going to do what I want to do, maybe we wouldn't have to have so many obnoxious laws and regulations. Since every bit of that is highly unlikely to happen anytime soon, I think we're all going to continue to have to live in a world full of obnoxious laws and regulations. Yesterday late afternoon, I could hear somebody off in the distant remote woods running a chainsaw during the ban, during the critical fire time of the day. I would love to be able to live in a world where we don't have to have so many obnoxious laws and regulations. But what do we do in a situation like this, when everything is so critically dry, fire resources are being spread thin because there's so many wildfires around? Do we just allow people to go out, throw sparks around in the tinder dry woods? I know chainsaws don't throw a shower of sparks. It's an occasional spark here and there, but there's still sparks. All it takes is one. I don't have a good answer for the regulation question, but I do know the same agency who makes these fire regulations is the same agency we expect to come save our butts, our homes, our towns, sometimes even our lives, when we start one of these fires. The person who's getting upset about these fire regulations is probably going to be the same person who's going to be criticizing this agency for not doing enough because they lost their home in a wildfire that was started by some jackwagon out in the woods running a chainsaw during a chainsaw ban during the critical fire time of the day. With the situation being the way it is, I am okay putting my chainsaws on the shelf, sitting this one out until we finally get some rain. When they drop the restrictions, it becomes safe to run chainsaws again. Not just because it's the law, because it's the right thing to do. I don't want to be the next person to start the next fire. I sometimes think about those two guys to the north who started the fire. That wasn't with a chainsaw, they did it with a mower, but it was all part of the same ban. But I think, what would that be like? What would it feel like knowing I was the one who started the fire? Getting a bill for $37 million you have to pay would blow some serious chunks, even if you do get to split it with somebody else. But maybe worse, what about just knowing you were the person who burned down 26,000 acres? What if homes were lost by the fire? What if it burned down a town? What if somebody died in the fire? What would it be like trying to live with that? I don't want to find out.